In this video, I'm going to show you how to make HTTP GET and POST requests in Flutter. I'll be using a resource called jsonplaceholder.ipcode.com, which provides a fake REST API that can be used for prototyping and testing. So in this video, we will not be creating our own REST API. Instead, we will utilize the JSON placeholder to fetch and upload data through GET and POST requests. I will put the link of the REST endpoint that we will be using in this video, so you can easily copy it from there. Now let's get started. I have a brand new project here, and to be able to perform HTTP requests, we of course need the HTTP library as a dependency. So go to the pubspec.yaml file. By the way, if you press Ctrl+P in VS Code, then it opens this file search, and you can search for any file in your project and then you can navigate to it. A very helpful feature. Under the dependencies, add the HTTP library with the latest stable version. You can find the latest version on pub.dev. You can directly copy the version number from here. Once you have it, save it to install the dependency. Now go to main.dart. Here remove everything and then import the material.dart. Create the main function, call the run app, and this is going to show the my app widget which we are going to create. Create a stateful widget with the name my app. Now our task is to fetch this list of JSON found on this URL, and then we have to show that JSON list in a list view in the application. And to fetch that data, I am going to create a function named fetch posts. And now to perform a GET request, we just have to call the GET function available in the HTTP library. This will automatically import the HTTP package, and the parameter here is the URL from which we want to fetch our data. So let me create a variable named URL, and this will store this URL. This HTTP is treated as insecure, and by default, insecure HTTP is disabled in Android and iOS, so this will not work. There is a way to allow insecure HTTP in Android and iOS, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. Instead, just put HTTPS instead of HTTP. And now this GET function will not take the URL as a string. Instead, it is going to take it as a URI object. So we are going to use the URI.parse, and then we will pass the URL here. And just calling this GET function with this URL will perform the GET request. But this is not enough. Since this is a network request, it is going to take some time. So we will have to make our function asynchronous, and then to receive the value returned, this GET function returns a future response. So to extract this value, we will have to put an await keyword, and then whatever value it returns, we are going to store it in a response variable. And if I look into this response object, then it has this body parameter which is a string. This string is nothing but the JSON data. So we cannot use that string directly as the JSON. So we will have to convert that string to a JSON object or a map object in Dart. And to convert a JSON string to a JSON, we have this JSON decode function in Dart, and here we can pass the string JSON that we want to parse. And I'm going to store the value returned in a variable named JSON data. Now from this URL, we are fetching a list of JSON. So we can safely cast this JSON decode as a list, because we are getting a list of JSON from this posts URL. But doing this is not safe. It can throw exceptions. So for example, if the mobile device does not have an internet connection, then this will throw an error and the app will crash. Or if the URL is wrong, then again an error will be thrown. So we have to handle that error to avoid the app from crashing. So surround this piece of code in a try-catch block. And if any error occurs, then I'm not going to do anything in the catch block. But if you are working on a real application, then of course you will want to handle this error and show appropriate data on the screen to inform the user that an error has occurred. But I'm going to leave this empty. Now that I have the list of data, the task now is to show this in the UI. And to do that, I'm going to create a global variable here named posts.json, and this will be initialized with an empty list. And now this posts.json will hold a reference to this JSON data. And I will do that in the setState function, since I want the UI to rebuild when the JSON data is fetched. Now let's write the code that will show this data onto the screen. This build function will return a material app. The home of the material app will be a scaffold, and the body of this scaffold will be a list view builder. If you haven't used the list view builder before, then don't worry, it is very simple. I will just show you now. This list view builder also requires the item count. So here we have to pass the number of items that we have, and that will simply be equals to the length of the post.json. And now this item builder is a function which returns a widget for the list item. So let's create that function. The first parameter in this function is the context, which we are not going to use. And the second is the index of the list item for which we have to return the widget. Here I'm going to get the post from the post.json at the index I, and then I will return a text widget with the text title, and the title will be post title. We have a title and a body in the JSON, and we will be showing that in the list item. I have a typo here, this dollar does not belong here. And then on a new line, I am going to show the body text, post body. And to make this a little prettier, I'm going to add 2 new lines at the end of it. But right now we are not making any call to the fetch post function, so the data will never be fetched and the UI will simply be empty. So we will be calling this fetch post function from this init state method. This init state function is called when the app starts. This is the appropriate place to call the fetch post function from. But if your widget was not a stateful widget, if it were a stateless widget, then it would not have an init state function. So this fetch posts call would go into the build function. But for a stateful widget, you should not be doing this. Now let's run and see if it is working. Yes, it is working. Now let's take a look at how we can perform post requests. To show how a post request works, I'm going to have a button on the screen, and when that button is pressed, then we'll post some data to this REST endpoint. So let me remove this list view from this scaffold's body. Instead, I'll have a center child. The child of this center widget will be an elevated button. The child of this elevated button will be a text which will say send post, and when the button is pressed, we will perform the post request. We don't need this init state and fetch posts function anymore, so remove that. And here I'm going to create a function named post data. This function will also be an async function since we are going to perform a network request. And to make a post request, we have a post function in the HTTP library. First parameter is the URL to which we want to post our data, and the second is the body. We can pass the body as a JSON or a map, and the JSON object that we want to pass here will contain a title, a body, and a user ID. And this ID will be unique and it will be assigned by the JSON placeholder server. Now, when I perform the post request on this URL, it will not actually add that data into this list. Instead, it will fake it. So if the post request is successful, then it will return the data that we sent to it. And this time the data that will be returned will contain a unique ID. So let us make the post request and see if we are getting anything back from that JSON placeholder server. If you're getting the JSON that we posted back with the unique ID, then our post request is considered successful. So the title will be anything, doesn't matter, body, post body, and we also have to pass the user ID 1. This is a network request, so we will have to put the await keyword in front of it, and then we can store the response returned by this function in a response variable, and we can access the JSON string this response holds by the response.body member, and I'm going to simply print that body. Let me put it in try catch, and we can pass this post data function to this on pressed in this elevated function. So when the button is pressed, this function will be called. When we are passing a function as a parameter, then we don't need this braces. And now let's run and see if it is working. By the way, the app is launching in Chrome instead of the Android emulator, because with Flutter 2.0 the web support is stable, and now we can run the application on web browsers as well. So let me click on the send post button and let's see if it works. Did anything happen? Let's see the... Yes, we have a unique ID coming to us. Let's try that again. It's some different text. If I click on this, then we should get that back, and we do. So this was it about post and get requests in Flutter. By the way, in a real application, we should not be putting our network code in the widget. It's not clean. We should always follow a proper architecture, and with Flutter, the way to go is BLoC. So if you want to write organized clean code with good architecture, then use the BLoC pattern. I have a tutorial that teaches you how to use the BLoC pattern. I will have it linked in the description. Watch it if you want to write better and organized code.